I mean, it mainly started because Wagner was independent from the Russian Federation. And around that time, you saw the Nasco essentially get stripped of their independence and get completely formed into the Russian Federation. And including their armed units, a lot of volunteer units also got folded up in that. And Wagner was essentially the only one that had maintained its independence and was proud and open about it too. And with Bakhmut and Soledar, you started seeing like kind of direct, you know, declarations of, oh, look at look at Shoigu and his army, and they're doing nothing. Like, Wagner, we're doing the taking cities, and really was just that it looked bad for Shoigu and Gerasimov and all the other Russian leadership, and Wagner and Prigozhin just was a threat to their positions and their authority. And
Yes.
that's when you started seeing ammo being
The ammo
cut,
video.
support being cut, and all this stuff. And that went on for a while and started increasing veracity as Wagner continued to get popular.
I think
I
that's
mean,
it.
yeah,
He
I
was a
mean,
threat to Putin.
yeah, well, not necessarily Putin, more Shoigu and Gerasimov and the actual, Ministry of Defense. And like you had, Wagner recruiting stations, like you can't get more more separate than
It split the effort.
having your own recruitment, your own logistics, your own. I mean, you even had essentially Wagner Air Force flying around.
Mm.
So it was essentially a second army being built.
Yeah, I'd like to make a parallel between history. I'm no Roman historian, but I
Yeah,
roughly know the story of Caesar, right?
yeah,
Like he was off fighting the Gauls, and eventually he was ordered back home. From what I understand of the story, he brought his armies, thought about it for a bit, and then decided, no, I'm not going to give up power to a bunch of people who sit in Rome while I spent the last few years fighting with my army in France. In fact, I'm going to cross the river Rubicon, cast the die, and take Rome by storm. It happened because the army, after fighting with him for a long time, was more loyal to Caesar than they were to the Romans in Rome, and the Roman Senate in Rome. I started to see some of that happening, like Prigozhin at that time, not only was he one of the few Russian leaders who were actively in the front.
mhm,
It was similar to what Zelensky did in the beginning stages of the war. You had Prigozhin post videos where you could see the bullets fly in the background. I mean,
yeah,
he was like artillery was right next to him, like the soldiers would be like, the enemy, oh, where are they? 300 meters that way.
yeah. There was video of him in Bakhmut one time where he literally met with assault groups right before they were about to attack, and
Right,
the enemy was like, and the Ukrainians were 100 meters,
right.
tops, like, a block away essentially.
Yeah.
And
Поздравить всех парней, которые воюют. То есть Артемовска.
А сколько здесь примерно в метрах?
400 метров. Да, противника, да. Ну что, пойдем, это наше поздравление будет последнее.
there was Prigozhin with his driver,
Yep.
shaking hands and saying, and good luck on your attack.
And the soldiers saw that. Not only did they see that he was actually on the front line instead of someone like Putin, Gerasimov, or Shoigu, who are thousands of miles in the rear in Moscow, right? He was one of the few individuals who truly was talking openly about the war,
Yeah,
right? What the most interesting period I saw was when he started having disagreements with the Ministry of Defense. Prigozhin posted a series of videos on his Telegram where he talked about the reasons the war started, the reality of how it was going. At this point, it was not going well for the Russians. And when all the other Russian opposition leaders were found with 2 bullets in the back of their head and a note saying, "Oh, it was suicide,"
yeah.
he was
Falling
someone.
out of windows.
Yes,
Yeah.
he was someone who was openly saying to the camera, "Hey, the Russian ministry is lying to you. This war is not going well. The reasons we're fighting this war were actually such, such, and such. And all of the oligarchs that support the war, their children are studying abroad in the West, and the people that are dying are ordinary Russians." And this was significant. Not only was he openly calling out the Russian state and indirectly Putin, Although he was very careful not to
Yeah.
ever name Putin directly, right?
That's
The second problem was he was winning.
Yeah.
He was right. And he was surrounded by a loyal army. There was nothing that the Russian state could do, right? It's one thing to remove so-and-so politician if he gets out of line, right? Here was Prigozhin, putting up flags in the center of Bakhmut in the bloodiest war, since World War II.
Yeah.
And he was in a very strong position. And when he openly called out Shoigu and Gerasimov in that famous video,
Сожму! Герасимов! Боеприпасы!
Putin was between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, he has to support his own loyal stooges. On the other hand, Bakhmut were successful. Wagner was successful. They
Yeah.
won over Bakhmut, and he has thousands of people. And now at this point, he has artillery, he has tanks, he has helicopters. It's a very, very sizable force that he can't just remove as if it was just one of his pawns. The pawn is now becoming an independent player. And this is when things start to get absolutely
Yeah.
crazy. Okay.
All right. So, getting into Prigozhin's march on Kiev.
Mhm.
The big thing, well, from Prigozhin's claim, I kicked out the coup attempt was allegedly Russian Air Force on by the direction of Shoigu
Mhm.
that struck a Wagner camp,
Mhm.
logistics camp or something like that, I forget.
Yes.
And I believe Prigozhin said that he had information that Shoigu was gathering his own, essentially loyalist forces. Then, for whatever other reasons,
Mhm.
Prigozhin decided the best course of action. Yeah. Best course of action was to march on Moscow
Mhm.
and then depose
Yep.
Shogun Gerasimov personally.
Yes. And he took that personally.
Prigozhin just decided to escalate things all the way to 100
Yes.
by himself.
Yes.
And I guess in Prigozhin's defense, it started off strong.
Mhm.
I mean, he was able to get to all the way to Rostov-on-Don
Mhm.
without any resistance and take over the military base there,
Mhm.
or military, I forget what it was, command headquarters
Mhm.
located there. Zero resistance. But unfortunately for him, issues kind of sprung up immediately, or at least in the first day. The two main ones was Rubicon video, because Rubicon was Prigozhin's #1 supporter in the Ministry of Defense,
Mhm.
and was essentially, Wagner's guy
Mhm.
in the MOD. And he, voluntarily or not, debatable,
Mhm.
unproven if he was forced to or not, made a video essentially denouncing the March on Moscow, or the Freedom March, I believe it was called,
Mhm.
within Wagner.
March for Justice.
March
I
for
think
Justice,
is
yeah.
how he framed it.
Yeah, March for Justice, that's the one.
Right.
Yeah. And the second issue is that no one involved, none of the National Guard or Russian forces that he encountered, while they let him through with no resistance, none of them joined him.
Mhm.
For the entire March for Justice, it was essentially the initial starting guys.
Mhm.
And like you said earlier, with that reference to Caesar
Mhm.
and his
Crossing the Rubicon.
crossing the Rubicon with his legions, he was able to win because other legions had joined him,
Mhm.
and
Right.
he gained active support
Mhm.
for his efforts. Well, meanwhile, Prigozhin didn't.
Right. I mean, it's still shocking to this day how this hot dog seller
Yeah,
was now leading a charge and thunder run to Moscow at the head of one of the strongest military organizations on the planet. This guy lived several lifetimes more
yeah,
than this lifetime. Beyond being a crazy warlord, a business mogul, Putin's chef, and everything, he was also a children's illustrator at one point.
yeah,
There's a really good Lenin quote where he says, there are decades where nothing happens, and then there are weeks where decades happen. In this case, it escalated from a disagreement between the Ministry of Defense and Prigozhin to him leading the most serious challenge to Vladimir Putin's decades-long hold on Russia overnight. I mean, we had a convoy after capturing Rostov, we had a convoy literally make it to halfway across Russia Putin was allegedly said to have been either bunkering down or flying away. I mean, that's how serious the threat to his
Yeah.
power was. And I agree. It stopped because he did not get the support that he thought he had.
Yeah.
I still think to this day, we might never know. I mean, this might be one of those cases where the people who do know are dead or they will never speak about
Yeah.
it because of their role within it.
Yeah.
We can only speculate. I personally think it's because the Russian state threatened the lives of not just the commanders, but the families of the commanders as well, forcing Prigozhin to pull out, which to this day I think was his fatal move. I mean, once you come for the king, you best not miss. And he missed. He blinked.
Yeah.
And that was just like the start of the end for Prigozhin.
I mean, Prigozhin's fate was sealed the moment he decided to revolt. I think what he did, though, and I believe this more as time goes on because I kind of see it going into effect, is Prigozhin decided to. Prigozhin knew that he was a dead man, one way or another. Like, you know, his life was limited the second he stepped out. But I feel he stopped to save Wagner as an organization. And we see that, especially today, because Shoigu has been not necessarily removed from power, but he had his position. He got moved from his position. Wagner has not really been removed at all. Wagner's still not around as an independent faction anymore. But locally, they're still the same forces in the same command structure. The Russian Africa Corps and that's been assembled is essentially Wagner. I believe they have much more. It is direct Russian army there present, but personnel, commanders, and officers are mostly Wagner still.
Right.
Wagner has not gone. In fact, it has thrived. It's integrated now. It has actual authority now. And now we have Shoigu leaving. Instead of being removed from the military position he was in for years.
Yeah.
It seems in some ways that Wagner has actually won the March for Justice at the cost of its top leadership. In a way.
It's an odd situation. I mean, I was surprised at how long he survived.
Yeah, I think it was 2 months.
Yeah, they obviously shot down the plane that killed him.
Or had a bomb on board.
But, you know, it took a while. In the meantime, I remember they raided his house and they found like various odd disguises. One of him looking like Aladdin, the dictator. One where he looks like some celebrity with blonde fake hair.
Like a hipster.
Yeah, a hipster. And it's so odd, but like, you know, it's the end of someone who, you know, of an evil dictator who lived a very interesting life, right?
Prigozhin was actually an Elder Scrolls main character. He was the
yeah,
head of multiple guilds. He had done countless quests.
He had side quests.
He had side quests.
Like the one where he, you know, sold hot dogs. The one where he like had a fishing boat restaurant.
Yeah.
And then the one where he was a catering guy. And then one where he was like a warlord in Africa, right? Like, and then afterwards, there was like a time period where he was in Africa back.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean,
it was so odd.
I mean, Prigozhin traveled the world and did everything he possibly could. You know, again, he's a fantasy character, you know.
And he died in a spectacular fashion. I mean, live by the sword, die by the sword.
He literally went out in a giant kaboom.
But yeah.
You know, in a fiery explosion.
Yeah.
If